Welcome to Psyched for Psychology, a Nystrom & Associates podcast. Our hosts, Michelle Iverson and Brett Cushing, are both licensed marriage and family therapists at Nystrom & Associates. Each week, they talk about all things mental health and therapy, and you get a chance to dive into specific psychology topics that help promote personal development and wellness. And now, here are your hosts, Michelle and Brett.
Hello and welcome to another podcast edition of Psyched for Psychology. We're glad to have you with us. My name is Brett Cushing, licensed marriage family therapist.
And I'm Michelle Iverson, also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And thank you so much for joining our podcast today. Episodes are going to be released weekly on Tuesday mornings. You can also email us at podcast@nystromcounseling.com. We've been loving the emails coming through with your thoughts, with your ideas, and upcoming episode topics that you want us to talk about.
Today we're going to be talking about something that I think is very relevant for you. But before I mention the topic, I kind of want to ask Michelle here, how does it feel? What kind of backseat driver are you? Are you one of those that are totally chill? Are you kind of like really vigilant? Are you on edge? What kind of backseat driver are you?
Depends on who is driving.
Exactly, yes. I was thinking about that myself. Like, all right, what kind of backseat driver am I? And it really depends. Mm-hmm. It depends on who's in the driver's seat. You know, I've got one brother, and my oldest brother, he still drives like he lives in Chicago. And I lived in Chicago, went to grad school there, and I get that. I mean, you're going...
We went through, well, not through, but around Chicago recently.
Oh, yeah.
They are crazy down there.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It was lots of horns blaring. Like, we're just trying to get through, everybody.
Oh, yeah, the slow lane, the very slow lane, you're going about 10 miles an hour over. Yeah, it's in the slow lane. And you'll get run over in the fast lane. I loved it when I lived there, okay? And yet you're also right on that back bumper of the person in front of you. Yes. And my oldest brother, God love him, he still drives that way. And my other brother can attest to this. And so when he's driving, I'm a little bit on edge, like, oh no, getting a little close, a lot of red up there. And then my other brother, Tim, he's real slow and, a lot of distance there. I'm somewhere probably in between. But it is interesting that the type of backseat driver we are depends on, like you said, who's in the driver's seat.
Right.
So, the same is with our emotions sometimes. Our emotions can be great, right? When we have a positive emotion and it's intense, I have no problem with that emotion sort of being in the driver's seat.
Yes.
Love that. But isn't it interesting when we have those, quote, negative emotions and they're strong and they're intense and we feel as though those are in the driver's seat, it's unnerving for us. It's hard. It's unsettling. And it produces more anxiety. It's almost like this snowball effect. I got this negative emotion that I feel I don't have control over. It's super intense. Now I'm experiencing this anxiety that goes along with it or subsequent to it. And whoa, how do I manage this? And how do I get myself out of the back seat so that I'm driving this car and I'm the captain of this ship? That's what we're going to talk about today. How to manage those intense emotions so that when they sort of take over and begin driving the car of our life, we can resume control and have a sense of being in charge of our emotions rather than our emotions taking charge of us. So towards that end, first let's talk about what are emotions? What are emotions, Michelle? You're a therapist. Come on, what are emotions?
We're talking about those base feelings. I kind of think about there's about 8. I don't know if I can remember them all off the top of my head, but about these 8 base primary emotions. When we think of fear, happiness, sadness, we can all across cultures kind of agree on that base feeling. And then they develop and become more complex from there. We could have secondary emotions. We can have, it's essentially like a response to that primary emotion. So if I experience fear, this base emotion and feeling, I could then have a secondary emotion to that. If I could experience shame about feeling afraid, And so that's where that term emotion, that becomes very complex when we're starting to talk about and start to pull apart that in the process of therapy and working with the client.
Absolutely. Yeah. So can you give an example of a secondary emotion?
Yep, absolutely. So if I got angry at my husband, he made a little mistake, and then I'm like, okay, well, hypothetically. And then hypothetically, I might be a little angry about it. If I feel angry, right, that can be that primary emotion. But then if I feel shame, I shouldn't feel angry. That becomes a secondary.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think of fear as that base one. And a lot of times fear can turn into anger because I feel so vulnerable, feeling fear or sadness, which is a base one. And then we become angry a lot of times just because I feel like I've got more control. Well, emotions, I think of the word emotion, the E standing for energy. And a lot of times we think of emotions in our field as energy in motion. And I like that definition because it's really neither good or bad. We're not looking at our emotions and saying it's good or it's bad. Notice how we do that, though, with our emotions, like especially anger. You know, I always love when people say, I've got a terrible temper. And I'm like, I've never met somebody who has a good one, right? And I think we struggle with some of these emotions. That's why I so enjoyed the movie Inside Out.
Yeah.
Who was the hero?
So good.
Yeah, who was the hero in Inside Out? Do you remember?
I remember. It was sadness.
It was sadness.
Yeah.
Sadness was the hero.
Yeah. And we all thought joy was going to be the hero. That's what they set it up to be.
Because joy is the right emotion to have. And it's wrong to be sad. So at any rate, we sort of do this. We judge emotions good or bad, and that doesn't help us. And I'll touch on that in a little bit. But what else? What are functions of emotion here? Like, what do you think are the functions of our emotions? If we're going to manage them, I think it's helpful for us to, when we explore these, understand what are their functions.
Are you asking?
Yeah, I am asking you. Okay. What do you think?
Well, when I talk about what are the functions, it's a lot. Well, I think of it from a CBT approach. We think about, with CBT, the idea of we have thoughts first, then emotions, then behaviors. And a lot of people might come into therapy thinking my emotion is the issue. But with the CBT approach, we take a look at your emotion is just a reaction, and oftentimes a very understandable reaction based off of the thought.
Ooh, I like that. So emotion is essentially a reaction or a response to our thoughts. Really hard to have an emotion apart from a cognition or a thought. And in college, I did security for rock concerts, and I learned that there's only a couple examples when we have an emotion independent of a thought. And music is one of them.
Yes.
I saw in all those rock concerts when the band started playing, boom, instant emotion. So I think of music and meds. Music and meds are kind of the only two things I've been able to come up with that really spark emotion and sort of bypass the cognition. And so I also think one of the functions of our emotions is they're like messengers. They're sort of saying, hey, you know, look out. I remember there was a show called Lost in Space. I'm a little older than you. This was like a show in the 60s. Okay, so I was born in 69. All right, and I was watching these old reruns, and there was this robot. And they were, you know, this family, you know, lost in space on some planet, couldn't get back, and there was all these dangers there. And then so whenever there was a danger, this robot had some sense about it. And it had this red light on its chest that started going off. And he would say, warning, warning, warning. And everybody, you know, the music went up and everybody knew like, oh, you know, there's a monster or some alien coming after them. I think that's kind of how our emotions operate. Or they're kind of like car alarms. Car alarms are messengers. And they go off. And when they go off, what do? We sort of check the facts. I don't just take off running to my car. I look, and my car doesn't know if it's real danger or if it's you know, kids playing within their football. Right. And so I check my emotion so that I'm in control of my life. But sometimes it feels for us, the emotion goes off, and that's the problem, and I have to respond to that. Now, sometimes the intensity of our emotion does become the problem. It's not the emotion itself. It's just the intensity of it. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts about things that cause intense emotions?
Well, again, from that CBT perspective, we kind of think about, are there thoughts, particular thoughts, very negative thoughts that might cause that? The use of extreme words, especially if those extreme words are a part of your thoughts. And when I say extreme words, I think of very black and white words. Mm-hmm. Always, never, shouldn't, can't, or you make me. It's a common one in couples therapy.
Just in our society, you make me feel this way. Right.
This way.
Yes.
It's very extreme. Thinking that I'm the only person who owns the truth.
Oh, right.
Whether it's the truth of my perception of how a situation is going, mm-hmm. or I'm the only one, like my emotion is the only truth. So how I feel in this situation.
That's powerful. I think even in our country today, mm-hmm. how divided we are on mm-hmm. so many different issues. And we have, I love what you're talking about. I refer to it as dichotomous mm-hmm. thinking. It's all or nothing, black mm-hmm. or white, right or wrong. And it's not only divisive relationally, mm-hmm. it intensifies our emotions and it makes it difficult to manage them. Mm-hmm. And we see it. And this is not a political podcast, but it's a psychological one. Mm-hmm. But look at news media and look at politics and social issues and how divided we are, because everything is really posited to us as all right or all wrong. This person or this stance is all right, or it's the other point is all wrong. Mm-hmm. And it not only divides us relationally, but it really it causes that intensity of emotion, and now the emotion becomes the driver, mm-hmm. and we don't think as well. And so I think what happens too is that when we have those kind of intense emotions, we know the frontal lobe where we do our rational mm-hmm. thinking, that shuts down. There's actual brain scans. You probably don't know, but did I tell you this once? Like there's those little brain scans that show a sign comes up that says out to lunch, mm-hmm. because really that's what happens. We don't think anymore. It's just pure emotion that's taking control. Now, dichotomous thinking is what you're touching on, this mm-hmm. absolute thinking, and it totally does that to us. What about trauma? How does mm-hmm. trauma affect our emotions and the intensity of them? Any thoughts on that?
Have you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score?
I love that book.
Love that book. This is, that could be, again, whole podcast on its own. If you haven't read the book, wonderful, wonderful book.
It's for everybody.
It's for everybody, not just therapists. And it's a very great descriptor of how and why trauma and experiences with trauma. Some people talk about like big T, little t, big traumas, little traumas. Mm-hmm. I see trauma as trauma. If we experience it as trauma, it is. And our brains and our bodies hold on to this trauma. And the intense emotion that comes from trauma at any age, any stage in life can be revisited because the body holds on to it. It has a memory of it and mm-hmm. will respond as such. And so we oftentimes don't realize, I've had those moments where I was in a situation, I was having just a physical reaction, but also an intense emotional reaction. And all I could think is, why? Why on earth am I responding this way? It does not make sense until I can think back to, I can think of this event in the past. Some small aspect of it reminds me of that. And now my entire body and my brain and my emotions are responding in the same exact way here and now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, we do have trauma from our past that still has an effect on us. And the way I explain it sometimes to my clients is that trauma is stored differently in our memory. Mm-hmm. And so like long-term memories, things that aren't traumatic, I picture it like a bookshelf. Mm-hmm. And it just goes on a bookshelf and you can take it off. Hey, the summer of 1987, this is what I did. And I remember, and you put it back, no problem. Mm-hmm. And you retell it. But trauma is stored in our active memory. Mm-hmm. And so I don't just retell it. I relive it. I re-experience it when I retell it because it's stored in my active memory. And so we have all of the intensity of that trauma that we're experiencing in that moment. Now, there's different trauma therapies that we can talk about maybe some other time on how to mitigate that and heal from that. But trauma is another cause of our intense emotions. Now, we also want to just touch on what you had said earlier. Mm-hmm. What does not cause our emotions? And I just want to be emphatic about it because like we laughed and said it's so prevalent in our culture. Michelle, what does not cause our emotions again?
Definitely not other people.
Other people do not cause it. But why is that so important to recognize?
Because there is so many times in which we do try to assign responsibility of our emotions to other people. You caused this.
Right. And not that you and I ever have this with our spouses, but some people would say that their spouse always does this and they make them feel this way. And what's so unfortunate about that is I'm really giving up control of my life now. I'm giving power to this person and I'm just subject to whatever this person does or says. I have no control. So I'm giving that up. And when we realize, you know what, I'm responsible. It's the person does an action, but then kind of referring back to what you were saying with CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, I have a perception about that, then I'm going to have thoughts about that. Then I'm going to have a reaction of an emotion. And that's just a messenger of kind of my emotion, my body's response, and kind of telling me what's going on. But it's not the other person. A lot's transpired there between their action and my perception, cognition.
Yeah, I talk with a lot of clients. I love, my family loves racing. They were up at Brainerd International Speedway watching, cars during burnouts and stuff. So we like racing, but we'll talk about the flags in racing a lot of times too when we talk about emotions. When we experience that thought and then now the emotion, a lot of people then what would come next is behavior. And what we decide to do can change depending on what we want to do about that emotion and how do we want to see it. Does it have to be a green flag? I'm going to go and potentially do a behavior that's not going to be helpful to me? Or can I use a red flag or a yellow flag to slow down and think about how do I want to respond next?
But when I am in intense emotion, everything's green, right?
That's hard to do.
You can fly a yellow flag or any other flag in front of me, but it's always green. That's all I see. And I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that. And that's the difficulty.
Yes.
My emotions, are they friend? Are they foe? And they can be both. And it depends on what do I do with this. And let's talk about that. How do I manage it when it's so intense and all I see are green flags, go, go, go. I have to act on it, even in that moment, I might know I'm going to regret that later. So how do we manage this? Yeah.
First, I like to understand why is that the case, right? When we talk about, let's talk about even just like with a regular emotion versus an intense emotion. What is making it where that intense emotion is making us think, okay, green flag, I'm not going to stop. And a lot of it that I like to talk about with clients is the reptile brain. Or I like to call it the alligator brain. So when you hear that term reptile brain, we're talking about your brain stem, back of your brain, basal ganglia. This is responsible for basic vital survival functioning. It can be responsible for things like your body temperature and your hunger, but also breathing, just the basics of life. And so part of the brain that would be very much present in reptiles as well too. But if that part of our brain becomes activated, it's going to shut down other parts of our brain. So which part of our brain gets shut down?
Yeah, that frontal lobe.
Our frontal lobe. That is completely responsible for our higher level thinking and our decision making, which is very important. And so when I talk about clients about alligator brain, sometimes that's like our easiest metaphor, especially for kids, to understand what's happening when I get this very intense emotion. Why is it that I just react without thinking about the consequences of my actions or whether or not I really want to do this right now, it can help to think of it as an alligator. What's an alligator going to do if something comes near it?
It's going to react. Yeah.
Just react. And so that sometimes is what's happening. One part of our brain becomes highly activated, but it's very primal, and our decision-making part of our brain is going to shut down.
Yeah, and the way I describe it, too, is that's that fight or flight response that kicks in. And so there's two responses. Some forms of therapy, I know I do EMDR, trauma therapy, and they talk about a window of tolerance. Like, hey, I can handle tough things, stressful things. I have ups and downs all day. But there are certain things that send me up and out of what I can really tolerate. And when we get activated like this, we can go up and out or down and out of that window of tolerance. And I call it the FU zone. Forget you. That's the F word.
That's what we mean.
I know that's what you were thinking of. And so when we get really activated like that, we can go up and out, and trauma can trigger this too, but we go up and out into that fight or flight mode, and then it's like, forget you. And it's fight, it's anxiety, it's anger, it's self-preservation, all taking over. And that's when the driver and the driver's seat is that intense emotion. Now, there are other times when we go down and out and we kind of shut down, and that's not forget you, that's just forget it. I'm done, it's over. And now some of us might even realize as we're listening to this, we can just vacillate back and forth from forget you, fight or flight, to forget it and just shut down. We don't ever get back into that window of tolerance. We're just kind of always back and forth. And maybe we get activated and it's like, oh, forget you. And then we think, oh, I can't believe I did that. And we have all this regret. And then we just shut down. And it's exhausting. And not just for us, but people we're in relationships with. So thanks for bringing that up. Like, where does this come from? So how do we manage it? I think everybody's on pins and needles. What do I do about this? And how do I manage these intense emotions when they're in the driver's seat? And I'm sitting in the back thinking, oh, look out, but I don't know what to do. One of the first things I think we can do is just name the level of intensity. Now, some of these things I'm talking about require a bit of mindfulness. We become aware, and some of the ways we become aware is sort of after the fact. We're going to blow it, but it's really important to go back and ask ourselves, what did go on there without any judgments, and just say, why did I get so activated? Why did I get up and out of that window? Why did my alligator in me come out? And we can sort of, one thing, ask ourselves is, what was my level of intensity? And if you subjectively ask yourself, where was I on a scale of 1 to 10? If you're at an 8, 9, or 10, that's when the alligator comes out, so to speak. And that's when that fight or flight mode happens. And a lot of times we'll look back and we'll say, I was probably at an 8. I was at a 10. If there was an 11 or 12, that's where I would have been. And so naming that and even debriefing with yourself afterward or with somebody else in a non-judgmental way over time helps us to be able to do that in the moment as well. And we're like, I'm up and out of the window right now. And I'm at a 9. So one, I would say, is just name that level of intensity. Any other thoughts you have?
We want to name the emotion as well, too. And when I say that sounds like, well, okay, well, duh. Of course we want to name the emotion. And shouldn't that be easy? That is way harder for a lot of people, though. Especially when we are stuck in a fight or flight state, stuck in that alligator brain state. Sometimes we have a hard time defining what is causing this reaction. We even just have a hard time figuring out of those 8 basic emotions, which one is it right now? I have a lot of people when I ask them, like, if we can name the emotion, what is it? I'm fine. Okay. Don't like fine. I have this giant fluffy pillow in my office. I love it. And my clients love it. And it is something called a feelings wheel. And if you've never seen one, you're essentially looking at just about most of the emotion words that you could come up with and the feelings words that we have centered around the primary emotion words. And so you figure out, what's my primary feeling? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it happiness, sadness, so forth? And then from there, you move out along the rings of the circle. And these are all printed on my big pillow. And you can figure out a more specific word as needed.
Right. And what happens, I think, with that is it's incredibly, when we feel validated, even if we're validating ourselves, it brings down the emotions. Sort of like, notice if my wife is scratching my back, I'm like, scratch just a little bit higher. And I have this serious itch. And she goes like way high. And I'm like, no. And I'm a little frustrated, like a little bit lower and over to the left. She goes way over to the left. I'm like, no. And it's frustrating. But what is it like when the person actually gets that right spot? You're like, oh yeah, that's it. That's perfect. Don't stop right there. And I think that's how it is with us. And I've seen it with clients that I'm sort of saying, is it anger? No, it's not anger. And they might be like angry that I got it wrong. And I get that. And does it feel like betrayal? Like, no, it's not that. Does it feel like, you were abandoned? Yes. Oh yeah, that's it. And you can see
that relief and that validation.
Yeah.
That not only can other people recognize, but then I can recognize for myself. I can self-validate this feeling is.
And notice how empowering that is. Like we're starting to take control now just by naming what level the intensity is and what the emotion is. Now, I also think we need to sort of figure out what's the goal when we're thinking about let me back up. When we're thinking about managing intense emotions, there's really two goals. And now I get this because I'm a dialectical behavioral therapist. And in DBT, we talk about two goals when we are in such intense emotion. One is I need to survive the crisis, or I also need to just accept reality, which is so hard because reality blows sometimes and I don't want to accept it. But let's look at that first one. Survive the crisis. What I need to do is just make sure that my intensity of emotion doesn't go up any higher than it is right now. So I might want to use certain things like deep breathing. Some deep breathing. Now, I never believed in this, to be honest. I never believed in it. I'm like, come on. And until I was smoking a cigar once, and I was like, wow, I just was doing some deep breathing, and I was incredibly calm after a while. And all I was doing was deep breathing, inhaling through our nose, holding it in deep, exhale slow through our mouth really works because it activates our parasympathetic nervous system, and that helps us to calm down. So that's one thing we can do. Another thing we can do is grounding. We call that grounding is where we're engaging our senses. Now, I would get this when I'd be working out with my son. We do karate, and like he was going to like whoop me. And I'm like, no way am I going to let him do that. And I would say, okay, I'm going to beat him. And I push myself too hard. And I'm like super anxious because I can't breathe. And so I would do grounding because I'd start to get anxious, and I'd just go outside where it's cold. I'd feel the cold air and engage my senses of feel, like I'm feeling the wind, I'm feeling the cold air. I'd engage my sight. What am I seeing? And I would just name the things I'm seeing. What am I hearing? And so when we're talking about trying to survive the crisis, we want to engage our senses. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I smelling? Pop in some hard candy and suck on something, or even something sour to kind of activate your senses again, and it brings down those emotions. Any other thoughts on that, or as we think about managing this?
I think this one's always a really hard one too, that idea of accepting reality, of even just allowing things. And it could be the reality of the situation that's occurring. It could even just be the reality of what my emotions are in this moment. It reminds me of that idea of letting go of this idea of right or wrong, whether it's right or wrong sometimes in a situation, or right or wrong in our emotions. I almost think about Inside Out. There was a right emotion. There was a wrong emotion.
That's a good point.
Joy was right. Sadness was wrong. What did we find out at the end?
Sadness was the hero that was being neglected.
Yeah.
Because it was really categorized as all bad.
Right. And it ended up being like a lot of, I see it as like accepting, all the characters accepting that reality of all of these emotions are so needed and vital for this little girl. And so we talk a lot about radical acceptance, this idea of everything is as it is. And that's so hard because I get so many clients and I get it where they're like, so you mean you're telling me that I need to like think that the situation I'm going through is good? It's like, no, that's actually not the case. That is different than just saying it is.
Right. I had that just this morning in a very simple way. Washed my car last night and I was excited because I like driving over here on Friday mornings with the sunroof open, my clean car, and it was pouring rain this morning.
Yeah.
And I was tempted to say, something along the lines of, I shouldn't have washed my car, or it shouldn't be raining today, right? And notice the absolute all or nothing categorization I'm doing. And I've learned just to say, I wish it would be different because I'm acknowledging some acceptance. Like I don't really have control, but when I should on the weather, if I should on myself or others, I'm making absolute claims on the way the world is supposed to be. And that just further intensifies my already kind of negative emotion.
I talk to people a lot about it. Like I'm coming to a fork in the road. When I'm starting to decide, what am I going to do with this intense emotion? Am I going to work on that radical reality acceptance? Or am I going to choose to reject reality? And how is that only going to hurt me if I decide to do that?
Right. Yeah. We want to be thinking long term. It's hard because that thinking part of our brain kind of shuts down. If we can use some of these other skills, the deep breathing and the grounding. And a big one I wanted to mention too is when we're really intense in our emotions, grab some ice or something cold and just hold on to it. And as you hold on to it or you splash a lot of cold water on your face, that actually calms us down. Now we can start to do some of those thinking exercises and what's going to be beneficial for me long term. I can remember when I was learning how to drive, I thought if I'm going to get where I need to go, I have to look right in front of the hood of the car in order to go straight. And I was like all over the lane. And my instructor said, you don't want to look there. You want to look down at the end of the road through the curve where you want to be. And that's how you're going to drive straight. And it was like, what? No, I can't do that. But it's so true because in the midst of our emotions, if we can get them to calm down, it allows us to think, all right, what is my long-term goal down the road that I'm really aiming for?
I'm going to ask you about acronyms because DBT is big on acronyms.
Oh my goodness, yes.
What kind of acronyms go along with ways that we can manage these intense emotions?
Well, how much time do we have left? There's so many acronyms.
We're good on time.
Yeah, well, one is Improve the Moment, where we are looking at, the acronym is IMPROVE, it's improve, okay? And there's one of those in there I like is the letter M stands for meaning. We want to find meaning in situations. And notice a lot of times the way we find meaning is we think, like you said, in these all or nothing absolute categories. God hates me. My life is never going to go better. I'm doomed to this. I was just talking to you about my relationship with technology. It's always bad, right? And so we look for meaning, but sometimes we find our meaning and define it in just these negative terms. And Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, that's a good book.
Yeah, he survived concentration camps. And he found meaning, even in the midst of that. And he developed Logos therapy, and it's really helpful, but he really uncovered how important finding meaning is. Also, prayer. Prayer is another part, or praying to a higher power. That there's a lot of research now that shows prayer does have a positive effect on our mental health. Validation, exercise, these are all parts of that. And then there's the accepts skill, accept, ACCEPTS. And you can research these online, the improve skill, the accept skill. But are you familiar with the accept skill and any of the things there that people can do?
I never remember these acronyms. Don't ask.
I'm looking it up a lot
I always
of
have to look it up. I can't remember.
Right. Well, another one within the accept skill is we also want to be looking at how do we bring down our emotion by the accept skill? And I just have a thought. I think one of the most important things when we're thinking about accepting reality, I was thinking the accept skill, and I was thinking about what you're talking about. we sometimes just have to accept reality the way it is. Mm-hmm. And that is so incredibly hard for us because we have this struggle and we're objecting to reality, mm-hmm. and we're wanting justice. And a big thing we need to do is recognize I can't change this. I have to accept reality for what it is because I can't change it. And the more I try to change something that's out of my control, the more I get controlled by that. And so when I don't accept reality that is out of my control and there's nothing I can do about it, I continue to suffer. But when I can accept reality, I don't suffer anymore. Now, the hard part is we think if I accept reality, that means I approve of it. Mm-hmm. And we're not saying that we approve of injustice or evil or wrongdoing. We're not saying we approve of that. We're just saying there's nothing we can do about it. Mm-hmm. And I have to accept that. It's incredibly hard, but it's also incredibly helpful if we're going to survive these intense periods of high emotion.
And what do we do if other people are the ones struggling with the intense emotions?
Yeah, I love this question because I think a lot of us struggle with it because we see other people with their intense emotion. Mm-hmm. They are feeling out of control. And then mm-hmm. how much more do we feel out of control when we see somebody like that? And mm-hmm. so a lot of times we offer these kind of hurtful, well-intended, but still hurtful, invalidating kind of responses mm-hmm. to try to fix people. So if you're really stressed out, I'm mm-hmm. going to say things like, well, don't worry, it's all going to work out. Mm-hmm. Or I'm going to steal the spotlight and say, I went through that once. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to fix you mm-hmm. so that I can feel better. Mm-hmm. And so I really want to encourage us when we see people like that, don't fix. It's understandable you want to because you don't mm-hmm. want to see them suffer and you don't want to suffer. But don't fix people. Feel their emotion with them. Mm-hmm. Again, it's kind of like that scratching someone's back. When you get that right validation of where the itch is and you scratch it, like you said, there's that release of energy and it just feels good. And if we can say, wow, it sounds to me like you're feeling really alone right now. Mm-hmm. Or just to be able to say, well, it makes sense that you would feel that way. Mm-hmm. We don't say it makes sense when we are offering up solutions of how to change it. What we're really saying is it doesn't make sense for you to feel this way. You need to change that. And what effect does that have?
Well, it reminds me of that great Brene Brown video. I love the animated version of this one where she's describing exactly that. The unhelpful ways we tend to respond to other people's intense emotions. Mm. And she's describing that idea of they're feeling stuck in this hole. Why don't we just climb down there, go there with them and be there with them through that?
I haven't heard that. Mm-hmm. I love it because I often say,
you said that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like just get on a ladder, go down in the pit and just sit with them. Sometimes don't say anything. And so sometimes the best thing is feels like you're doing nothing. And that's the best thing. Just mm-hmm. have a non-anxious presence. So focus, don't try to fix them. Focus on yourself and the anxiety you're feeling. Do some of that deep breathing, right? And try to get your own self calm and just have a calm, non-anxious presence with somebody else and just ask this, hey, how can I help? Mm-hmm. I love this. I love saying to people, I really hate this for you. How can I help you? Mm-hmm. Is there anything I can do to help? And if people don't know, we just say, okay. And we just stay and we sit with them in the midst of it. It's the most validating thing I think we can do for people.
Absolutely. And just kind of knowing that whether it's their feelings or your feelings, I think the biggest takeaway, they're not right or wrong. They just are. And that's a really important part of being a human being and the human experience.
One of the things we say oftentimes at the end of our podcast is, as we share these things, we're hoping people can look at others and look at ourselves mm-hmm. and avoid asking what's wrong with them. Mm-hmm. And start to ask, I wonder what's going on with them.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's what people can do at the end today is look at others, look at themselves in those times of high emotion mm-hmm. and pivot away from what's wrong with her to I wonder what's going on with her. Mm-hmm. And that way we can be more empowering towards ourselves and towards other people.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on this rainy day. And please make sure to like, share, subscribe to our Psyched for Psychology podcast. We're going to have new episodes released every week. You can find us on any major podcast streaming platform, and you can follow us for our new episodes.
Please do that. And please continue to email us your comments to provide or to give us your input. You can do that at podcast@nystromcounseling.com. That's podcast@nystromcounseling.com. And let us know any ideas for future topics that you would be psyched to hear us talk about. Again, you can also learn about Nystrom & Associates and all of our available mental health services by going to nystromcounseling.com. That's nystromcounseling.com. Thank you again for joining us. We are psyched to talk to you again soon.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom & Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.